All right. Well, I would like to welcome everyone back to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay, and today we are going to talk a little bit about stroke, identify a few of those survivors in recent memory, and also talk about some recent statistics. And this discussion is mainly talking about the more recent ones, the current events that maybe not necessarily current, but at least they're still fresh in memory. And we're going to talk about that as well as a little bit about statistics that are coming out from the CDC. And I think this will be very insightful. Like always, I would encourage you to maybe like. We do appreciate it when we get a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to this channel if you like this kind of information, or maybe you have a suggestion for a future video or a topic. We would love to hear it in the comment section down below. But like usual, sources will be in the description, so I always encourage you to look those up. But with that being said, let's get started. First off, we should talk about another stroke survivor. Well, we talked about Woodrow Wilson in one of our previous videos and how he had two strokes. Well, President Ford, after his term as 38th President of the United States, had a stroke in 2000. So, again, this is 25 years ago. So, it is actually fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. And he had it at age 87. Now, being President of the United States, he probably has the best health care in the world, especially being a former president, but he still had a stroke. Um, in this article noted down here, he noted that he started having some pain in his tongue, like some unusual pain in his tongue down there. And he also started having trouble with speech. Um, and he's somehow survived, and he survived another 6 years even after his stroke, even though he did have other conditions that were either underlying his other health problems. Again, stroke was probably not a helpful thing in his life, but he did survive. And this happened to him when he was age 87. So I can probably safely assume that he wasn't under the stresses of being an actual president of the United States at the time. But that's still an interesting discussion. He had a stroke that late in life. And if you read about his life, it's actually rather incredible coming up through sports and football, going into the Navy, and then eventually working his way up through politics and then becoming president of the United States, the only unelected president of the United States. So, with that being said, that's Gerald Ford's stroke in a nutshell. He had it late in life, and I think that is a point we should take in consideration. These things can happen late in life. Well, let's move to a different kind of professional, maybe someone um, who, maybe needs their voice. So we're talking about a musician named Randy Travis. You might have heard the song Three Wooden Crosses on the right side of the highway. Um, he had a near fatal stroke in 2013. So again, this is recent. This was 12 years ago. And he was age 54 when this happened. And he suffered what's called some severe aphasia. So, aphasia is the ability to speak or communicate. He suffered some severe aphasia. And that is very important to note here because what was his profession? He was a singer, he was a musician. He played a guitar, he sang songs. And so that affected his career. And he's had a very long recovery time. He's still alive today as of the making of this video. Um, but he is not fully recovered with his singing voice yet. Um, but who knows? We might get a album with Randy Travis's voice through AI. But um, he still has not fully recovered from that stroke, and that has probably really been a huge factor in why we haven't seen him quite commonly or recording any songs or any albums because he's got the aphasia. But I think that's still something that shouldn't necessarily preclude him from his former profession. Instead, he might have to take a little bit of a different role, and he is still involved in country music to this day. He's still involved in things like the Grand Ole Opry. And so I think this is a great story of this might have redirected his career, but not only did it redirect his life, but it also maybe became an icon, maybe brought some awareness to stroke because even at the age of 54, he's not necessarily um, that old, but he had a stroke probably at the height of his career. So let's keep that in mind that this can happen not only to someone who's elderly like Gerald Ford, this can happen to someone in the prime of their life, you might say, or maybe not even the prime of their life, but at the prime of their career, which that is probably when the prime of his career happened, was right before he had the stroke. Because I remember listening to him on the radio when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, and he was very commonly played on that radio station. So again, think about it. This can happen to the prime of someone's career and a prime of someone's life. So let's move on, and let's move on to a different kind of profession, maybe a different kind of person who's survived a stroke. And we come to an Olympian. This is probably the most interesting athlete that I was able to find who had a stroke, and his name was Michael Johnson. That's him right there. And as you can see, he was a very fast man. Um, at the time, he was the fastest runner for 200 meters, and that was back in 1996. So we're talking about a little bit shy of 30 years ago. But he suffered a stroke at the Olympics back in 1996. And he attributed a big portion of his recovery by his positive mindset and maybe by his athlete mindset of overcoming things. But what really helped him out is the immediate identification of the stroke, and that includes prompt treatment and be fast, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Um, and you might be thinking, well, Jay, why bring up an Olympian? Well, he's not necessarily an old elderly gentleman when this happens, and he's probably in the prime of his life physically, and yet he still ends up having a stroke. And I think that is definitely something that we need to be cautious of, which again brings me to the point of be fast. So let's talk a little bit about statistics because we've seen kind of an idea of this happens to those who are, shall we say, more experienced in years. This happens to people in the prime of their career, and it also happens to people in the prime of their health. And so every year we have 795,000 people get a stroke, roughly. And again, that's the CDC saying that. The majority of strokes are what's called ischemic, which is the blood flow is blocked. So think about a clot getting stuck in one of those smaller blood vessels and cutting off that oxygen supply, creating a area of anoxia. That's what the ischemic stroke does. And then stroke is also a leading cause of long-term disability. So think about Randy Travis. He's not able to sing anymore. Think about Michael Johnson. He might not be able to run not nearly as fast as he used to. He might be able to recover, but for someone like Randy Travis who suffers from aphasia, he's not really putting out he's not able to put out songs. He's not able to um, return back to that life, but he is still involved in a way. And the same thing goes with Michael Johnson. He is maybe going back to running, but he's not going to be the same. Strokes cost 56.2 billion with a B, billion with a B as in Bravo dollars. And that was back in 2019 and 2020. And as we can see on this map here, we see that there is a disparate distribution of strokes, especially in the South. And maybe this leads me to believe a few things. And I think moving on to this next slide, what does this lead me as the brain injury case manager to conclude? Well, we should know the symptoms of a stroke. We talk about be fast and before. We talk about balance. Maybe their eyes, their vision is blurred. Facial droop. Okay, that can happen. Maybe an arm or a leg is weak. Maybe there's a difficulty in speech. And if all that is true, time to get the ambulance. So time is of the essence with the stroke. The earlier you're able to get to medical help, the more treatment options are in fact available. So stroke can happen to anyone, a former president, a country music star, and also an Olympic runner. That doesn't preclude that the other professions, but this can happen to just about anyone. Stroke can happen at all ages. You might be asking, well, What do you mean? Well, it says, I didn't cover necessarily pediatrics here, but I'm making the point that this can happen to someone like Gerald Ford when they're 87, like Randy Travis when he's 54 at the height of his career, or to an Olympic runner in the prime of his physical health. And so, again, at all ages, that Olympians are not that old. So, all ages, keep that in mind. This can happen. Time, of course, is of the essence. That's why Michael Johnson was able to at least get back into some sort of running shape because they were able to get him on time because they knew about this thing called be fast. Prevention. Let's prevent these things from happening in the first place. As we can see in that map from the last slide, I'll pull it up here. Um, as we can tell from that map, is that there are certain areas where maybe we should have a bigger focus on stroke, particularly um, in the area down here near Alabama and Mississippi, but also in Virginia, also in Delaware, but also in all these other places. But um, we should also keep this in the forefront of our mind. And that's why prevention, maybe we should look into prevention methods. Maybe we should look into healthy habits instead of just mitigating what is going to happen. Maybe we should work on prevention as well. But those are my conclusions as a brain injury case manager. It's good to know this can happen to anyone at any age. Time is important, and let's prevent it if we can. But with that being said, here are my references. Feel free to look those up. We always enjoy hearing feedback. Feel free to comment, maybe subscribe to this channel if you like the information. We do appreciate it if you give us a like. Maybe share this video with a friend. Maybe they might know how to identify a stroke later. But with that being said, I think I will conclude it here. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Don't forget, protect your brains.